In July 1942, 39 black women out of a pool of 440 women were on active duty. In September 1943, the quote, auxiliary was dropped from the name and women became a true part of the United States Army, the Women's Army Corps. By the summer of 1945, the Corps had 120 black officers and nearly 4,000 black enlisted women on duty. However, the Women's Army Corps paralleled the Army in its treatment of blacks. The black WACs soon joined in with other blacks in the service, demanding equity in job assignments and training. Black servicewomen complained that while they were relegated to positions of cooks, bakers, and floor sweepers, white women were assigned to field jobs at higher technical schools. These inequities prompted 100 black WACs in March 1945 to stage a sit-in. Black WACs were also refused overseas duty. Not one black unit had been requisitioned to serve overseas until 1945, although whites in the Women's Army Corps were serving in all theaters of operation. The European theater was the only overseas theater to employ black WACs. Prompted by a furor of protests from civil rights activists and the black community, the 688th Central Postal Directory Battalion made military history and became the only black WAC unit assigned to overseas duty.
Colin Powell is one of the most renowned of the men who ascended to the rank of general in the U.S. Armed Forces. He was National Security Advisor to President Reagan, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and considered the mastermind of Desert Storm. Powell added another first when he became Secretary of State in 2001. In a Gallup poll, Powell was second only to the President of the United States as the most admired American man.
Long before anybody heard of Colin Powell, young 21-year-old Colin Powell made a decision to be a professional soldier. And I entered during a time when blacks were still second-class citizens of this country in 1958. But in my chosen profession, the Army, we had equal opportunity and affirmative action as early as 1958, and I was able to rise to the top of my profession by being a good American, by never forgetting my black heritage, and doing my job to the best of my ability, by performance. And so I rose. So I don't think I'm anybody's Uncle Tom or anybody's token. I have spoken out on black issues. I have never walked away from my blackness. I have used my blackness married up with the American dream and showed what an American journey can be for even a black person as a result of performance and hard work and studying and bettering yourself and not losing faith in this country to get to the top of my chosen profession, the military. And so I think I can be 100% American and I can be 100% black. And I find no conflict between the two.
He was the Marine Corps' first black pilot and went on to become the Marine Corps' first black general. General Frank E. Peterson is a living example of the black soldier's ability to fight and command. This is by no means a typical story because Frank Peterson is not a typical man. And what he has done has not been easy or without personal sacrifice, but he did it. Born in Pensacola, Florida in 1920, Daniel James Jr. was one of the 17 children of Lillian A. Brown James. Instilled with the spirit of achievement, James enrolled at Tuskegee Institute in 1937, where eventually he became one of the illustrious Tuskegee Airmen of World War II. Years later, he would reflect on his Tuskegee training.
Now, it was in 1943 that I completed flight training at Tuskegee Institute, Alabama. We've come a long way since then. In the early days at Tuskegee, in addition to the already difficult job of flying, we trained under the additional pressures of segregation. But we had no time for self-pity or despair. We were too busy preparing ourselves for a career of service to our nation. The state of our fully integrated Air Force today is a pretty good indication that we did a good job. But that doesn't mean that the future will be a rose garden, or that there will not be other obstacles to overcome. Freedom must be repurchased by every new generation. When the Tuskegee flying program was offered to America's black youngsters, we were ready. We had prepared ourselves for this opportunity, and when it presented itself, we grabbed it with both hands. Prepare yourself so that when your Tuskegee appears, you will be ready.
This is the story of a social experiment whose origin lies in one of the rarest periods of America's history. It turns the pages of military history back more than 50 years and begins in the America of post-World War I. It was 1919, and black people were called colored people, or Negro.
This was not a simple case of training a bunch of people to fly airplanes.
While the waiting period for white applicants for flying training was only a few weeks, some blacks had to wait as long as 3 years.
Down in space they go. Weathering by the 99, send them down below.
On August 21, Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. replaced Captain George Spanky Roberts as the commander of the 99th. The 99th was declared ready for combat in late September 1942. A variety of problems created a series of delays in getting an overseas assignment. For example, out of fear of racial problems, foreign governments, including the African nation of Liberia, and Air Force theater commanders did not want the Pioneer Black Squadron. In spite of pressure from the black press and civil rights groups, including Judge William Hasty's resignation from the War Department, it seemed that the Air Force experiment to test black pilots in combat would fail because the 99th, on whose shoulder the future of black air units depended, would never get overseas. Tuskegee Army Airfield had a new commanding officer, Colonel Noel Parrish. Although he made no substantial changes in the segregation pattern, he was perceived as more sensitive.
We were faced in a segregated situation, fighting in a segregated situation. And we were fighting against a racist power, the Axis powers, but in a segregated situation. So we had two things to prove. We had to prove, first of all, that we could do what they said that we could not do. And secondly, that we could do it under these circumstances, which we did. And that created a bond of camaraderie, a bond of togetherness that lasted throughout the years. You know, even going through cadets, you know, the white folks didn't want us to get through cadets. Many a night, I think, and I know I've done this, we've had some fellows who have some tough times, and we sit up with them all night long and hold them in our arms to give them the strength to get through. I get emotional about that, I'm sorry. It wasn't easy.
In this brief history, this story has barely scratched the surface of what happened. What we tried to do in telling this story was to highlight the historical facts and the human sacrifices. This and future generations of Americans owe nothing less than a debt of gratitude to these historic black airmen who put a sad period in racial relations behind us. The price the pioneer black flyers paid for equal treatment in the military is a proud legacy because the sacrifices have led to a more enlightened society.